like to put forth to you as well, but I'm sure you read the report early in the morning as well. What went through your mind? Let's get the ball rolling here, Mr. Jha.
Kabir, good evening, and it's good to be on your program. Let's cut to the chase and really bite the bullet. As you rightly mentioned, the timing. We are in the middle of a very crucial election, where it seems that very surprisingly there are rising headwinds against Mr. Modi's BJP. Now, here you have a prime minister who's earned the unprecedented title of being the first prime minister in India's political history to get a notice for hate speech, for actually speaking lies on a public platform and actually targeting, Muslims in a very direct fashion, and which appears clearly to be politically motivated. So when I read this report, all I could honestly do was snigger, because this is a manifestation of a high level of, what I call as desperation. Because when Mr. Modi's speeches are not working, when he's talked about, monasteries and temples being raided and their money being given away to the minorities, when he's talked about Mangal Sutra, when he's talked about the fact that the Congress manifesto is a Muslim document which hasn't really worked, this is resorting to actually abusing your state power by giving an agency which is part of the government the authority to spread disinformation. Now, here are two things that I would like to place on the table.
Right.
Number one, as you rightly mentioned, and Mr. Qureshi happens to be someone whom I know, and I've read his book in detail from page to page. The important thing is to look at where is the fertility rate. And here is the one data that will establish basically the misconceptions being created. In 1951, there were 30 crore more Hindus than Muslims. And if you look at around 2021, if you go by the estimates, there are approximately 80 crore more Hindus than Muslims, estimated. Clearly, these numbers that are being hyped at the moment appear to be trading on an extremely thin ice. Number two, the second point, that end of day, if you look at the fertility rate, which is the number of children being produced by a woman from a particular religion or a community, that gap between the average between all communities actually has come down, all communities. And the gap between the Hindu and the Muslim woman is frankly minimal, which basically tells you the critical thing that we need to know, that with emancipation of women, higher level of literacy, greater degree of income security, and the larger awareness of the importance of family planning, I think India is headed in the right direction. So for the BJP or its cheerleaders to believe that India today has to worry about Hindu khatre mein hai, well, that is the typical Bharatiya Janata Party or the saffron party's fear mongering that needs to be exposed.
Social media, people that have subscribed their allegiance to the opposition bloc are now, well, hitting out on those exact points that you mentioned over there, Mr. Jha. But shifting a little bit away from the politics, because I do want to touch upon all those facets as well. I mean, this report has come in the middle of the elections. Talking about the sourcing, I mean, the last census, we're awaiting our fresh census. The last census was 2011. The data, the facts and the figures in this PM economic report, I mean, how factual and credible are these numbers, this data that's now in public domain?
Well, Kabir, let's kind of not, flirt in the periphery, but call a spade a spade. I'm a student of economics, and I'm going to tell you with full responsibility.
Yes.
This government's GDP is suspect. And I'll give you one example because you clearly understand the technicalities. The GDP deflator, which is used to come to the real GDP, is wrong. They use the old wholesale price index when it requires a different economic denominator. It is a suspect GDP. And by the way, Yashwant Sinha, the former finance minister in Mr. Vajpayee's government, Arvind Subramaniam, chief economic advisor in Mr. Modi's government, have said, and this is long time ago, that India's GDP could be padded up by nearly 2%. Let's look at farmer suicide data. All of that has been basically massaged over the last 10 years. Even unemployment figures or poverty figures, if you go by this government's Niti Aayog, which is literally like a BJP think tank, and hardly a planning commission or an independent policy body. They have actually been creating data that nobody genuinely believes. So the problem with this government is it is following the playbook of all authoritarian governments, which is that I will give you the data that I want to give you, and you have no choice but to believe me because, hang on, this is coming from the government. So we live in times today where what you see is not what you get. And more importantly, what you get is what you need not trust. And therefore, I think there is a great degree of not just apprehension, but fear within people that end of day, what are you hearing? What are you reading? What do you interpret from what you're seeing? And that, I think, is the mirage or the whole, smoke screen which is created. So my short answer to your question, I'm sorry I've taken a little longer,
That's
is that
absolutely fine.
you cannot trust the statistics from them at all. And look at the way it has been presented. It has been presented in a way where it seems that the Muslim population is escalating at a galloping rate while the Hindu population rate is diminishing. That's wrong. You look at one data point. In 1951 or around that time, the Hindu population was on 80, I think around 84%, and I think the Muslim population was closer to 11%. After so 77 years, when the fertility rate was higher for the Muslims, you are now at a Muslim population of around 14% and the Hindu
Right.
population around closer to 80%. Now, with the population fertility rates coming closer together, you are frankly reaching a point where it will be at a status quo for decades to come. So all the people who are today doing this jugglery or trying to manipulate data to suit a
Okay.
political narrative are doing a great disservice to our country.
Well, smoke screen or a serious problem, like many BJP leaders are calling it. Well, we'll have to wait and find out. Mr. Jha, do stay on with us. We're going to go into a quick commercial breather, but on the other side, a little bit on, the Muslims in India. We'll, layer by layer, try and pick apart S.Y. Qureshi's report as well. Do stay on with us. And to you, gentlemen, as well. Lots more coming right on the other side. Keep watching News 9 Live.
India's ever-evolving urban landscape is witnessing a new revolution. And this one comes on four wheels.
The affluence has been growing. Cars are becoming more a reflection of what you are.
Nobody's talking about hatchbacks. Now what next? The next is the SUV.
The contribution of SUVs is close to 55-60% of the automobile sales these days.
Is that even manufacturers like to sell SUVs.
So, how did a nation obsessed with fuel economy come to love heavy gas guzzling sports utility vehicles? Let's look at how India fell in love with the SUV.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're trying to decode and analyze the Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister's report that says that there's a dip in the share of Hindu population from 1950 to about 2015. Political analyst, politician, author, Mr. Sanjay Jha continues to be with us on the broadcast, and we've been talking about various other facets of this particular report. But you know what? I was reading this headline, Mr. Jha. Do pay a little bit of attention. Says that BJP union minister is saying that this is a serious problem. It's now going to raise serious questions that the Hindu population is seeing a massive and major dip. But you know what? The headline, away from the economical and financial jargons and those words that don't really feature in the common man's lexicon, I'll tell you what, they'll pick up the headline that says Hindu khatre mein hai, and this is going to happen right in the middle of elections. Now that this report is out there, away from the pedagogical look at it, how do you think this is going to actually impact on ground zero the people who are going to go out and vote?
Kabir, a very pertinent question. If you look at the political history of most countries, you will find that such vulgar attempts at polarization usually have a very limited shelf life. At some point, they begin to diminish, then they plateau, and then they boomerang. For Mr. Modi, the diminishing, the plateauing, and the boomerang is happening within a very short period of time, which is why I think his party seems to be stumped. And normally, it happens over a period of time. Now, let me give you an example. When Mr. Modi sounded the big bugle of his 370 and 400 seats, it happened during the time of the Pran Pratishtha. That was in January 2024. And he believed that this election was done and dusted. What has surprised him is that this country at core, despite the attempt of the Sangh Parivar and its multiple, octopus-like entities, its attempt to try and divide and rule this country has not worked. The people of India have said, listen, you have done this for the last 10 years, but, end of day, we have been a secular society. We have had problems. We're not going to deny that there have not been issues in the past, but we believe that there are more pressing bread and butter issues to worry of instead of making me think about my neighbor and where my neighbor goes to pray or what do they eat. And therefore, the issues of unemployment, food inflation, corruption, governance, economic growth, these have all become very central to this election. So while the BJP, I do believe, will try its level best to create this entire fear amongst the larger majority community of India, I feel that strategy is not working anymore. And I think the problem with Mr. Modi's party is that they have no plan B. Their whole game plan, their entire playbook is driven by a very aggressive Hindutva mobilization. And while they may have converted a few over the last 10 years, the large majority of this country is very peace-loving, tolerant, inherently looking at a very happy community. Nobody wants the stress of, suspicion or fear or distrust or hate. And I think that the realization is dawning among this party, but they have nothing else to do. They have played all their cards and they believe this is the only available option they're left.
All right. That's Mr. Jha's viewpoint over there. Clearly a smoke screen. This report being used as a political tool. But you know what, Mr. Jha, shifting our focus a little bit more towards S.Y. Qureshi's report, I mean, he's a credible voice now, isn't he? And when he talks about the Muslims in India, talks about family planning, there is proper comparison between the high literacy states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, where you won't see such a scenario, but you'd see a similar situation where you have, let's say, 7-8 offsprings in each family across communities and religions. In a place like Bihar, where there is less, literacy rate, a lack there of education. Could you throw some light on S.Y. Qureshi's points about how Muslims have adopted family planning quicker than Hindus? He's cited, examples from Malaysia, Singapore, Egypt as well.
Kabir, let me give you 2 examples. I think one of the examples that I don't have the exact data, but if you look at the fertility rate of Muslim women in Kerala, it is lower than that of a Hindu woman in Bihar, right? What does that basically tell you? That is an exhibition of the fact that what matters is education, social growth, economic emancipation, which, by the way, has got nothing to do with religion or caste. Point number 1. Point number 2. By the way, I have got 2 more brothers, so we are a family of 4. And I come from a very traditional Hindu family from Bihar. I mean, how do you explain that? My mother, who unfortunately is no more, but I remember that she grew up and, she had like 8 brothers and sisters amongst herself. And she came from a very traditional Brahmin home. So is this got to do with religion? Not at all. In fact, many people in my parents' generation were never those who were part of siblings who were just 2 or 3. They were 4 at a bare minimum. So basically, I think we have all evolved. Today, when I look at my children, for example, and I'm being very transparent with you, I don't know whether my children will have more than even one child, if at all. So I think there is a change in social thinking. There's a change in ideological mindsets. There's a greater degree of, probably economic pressures, or even if people don't have some kind of an economic pressure, they feel they need to be more independent and not, kind of saddled with the baggage of raising children because it is more distracting or more difficult, etc., etc. So I think societies evolve. People change. There is no static in our world. The BJP is not even, I can't even accuse the BJP of being static. They are regressive. They are going in reverse gear. They are retrograde. When India is supposed to move ahead, here is a party which is actually seeing a mirage in front or is driving a reverse gear. I feel sorry for them because I believe India is a very enlightened country. It's a younger country. When I'm being interviewed by a young man like you, I get more optimistic about India than dismal.
Well, all right then. Many thanks for that. Mr. Sanjay Jha, thank you for joining us here, speaking to News 9, calling a spade. That's what Mr. Jha is saying. But on the other hand, before we move on, there are other stories. Let's take a look at some of the political reactions that came in today on this report.
यही कांग्रेस पार्टी की हमारे देश में लेगेसी रही है, हिंदू समाज की प्रताड़ना, हिंदू समाज को वंचित रखना और हिंदू समाज और सनातन धर्म का अपमान करना। ये जिस आंकड़े की आप बात कर रहे हैं वो प्रतिबिंब है कि कांग्रेस के राज में किस प्रकार से हिंदू समाज के ऊपर जिस प्रकार से सामाजिक प्रहार हुए हैं, हमारे समाज को जाति के आधार पर बांटने की किवायत हुई है, ये उसी का एक साक्ष्य है, ये उसी का एक परिणाम है।
प्रधानमंत्री की आर्थिक सलाहकार परिषद की एक स्टडी में पाया गया है 1950 से 2015 के बीच हिंदुओं की आबादी 7.8% घट गई है, जबकि भारत की जनसंख्या में अल्पसंख्यक समूहों की हिस्सेदारी बढ़ गई है।
ये सवाल कहाँ से आया आपके पास? ऑफिस की तरफ से ना? ऑफिस को बोलो प्रियंका जी पूछ रही है किसने भेजा उन्हें।
आप देखिएगा जो सेंसस होना था 21-22 में, आज 24 हो गया, अभी तक तो हुआ नहीं। ये केवल देश की जनता को भ्रम में डालना और लोगों में नफरत फैलाने की बात ये लोग कर रहे हैं। ये पूरी तरीके से प्रधानमंत्री जी, भाजपा के लोगों का यही एजेंडा है। 10 साल तक इन्होंने लोगों को ठगा है और फिर ठगना चाहते हैं।
Agendas, manifestos, war of words, elections clearly are the flavor of the season. And in these days, news spreads thick and fast, and so does fake news. I have a special segment on fake news coming right on the other side. Don't go anywhere.
India produces between 1,500 and 2,000 films every year, the highest for any country. But they get ignored at international awards.
The Oscars are basically American national awards for themselves.
You're not going to be able to make a better pizza than an Italian chef. You're not going to be able to make a better sushi. Make better sushi than a Japanese chef. Will you make better khichdi than a Japanese chef? Right? So I want you to taste my food. We are making cinema that we are proud of.
In fact, it has been 2 decades since an Indian feature film featured in the Oscars International Film category.
All these years, for much of its history, they've been just awarding their own films, and this one tiny category, Best Foreign Language Film, had the entire world frothing at the mouth to get into the Oscars.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9 Live. Elections are the flavor of the season in India these days, and with this, news is spreading thick and fast. But in today's digital age, news and fake news travel simultaneously. Sometimes misinformation spreads even faster. Now, according to the World Economic Forum's 2024 Global Risk Report, India has the highest risk of false information globally. A new survey conducted on the youth of Delhi, the youngsters in the national capital, comprising nearly 1,200 respondents below the age of 25, sheds more light on the fake news and how it impacts the society. Now, the survey report covers basically three broad areas. Number one, what is the